I'm just going to pause for a moment and then pray, and we'll dive right in. So, Jesus, I thank you for the gospel. I thank you for the truth that you love us, and that you are making a way for us to be reconciled. That you are making a way for the gap between us and you to be fixed. God, thank you that there is, as the song we sang, there's no sorrow on this planet that you cannot heal. God, thank you that is true. Thank you. I just pray the next few moments as I share that your Holy Spirit would be on me, your anointing would be on me, that cool, special presence that you give us to do cool things for you. I just pray that would be on me. Not because I've earned it or I deserve it, because I certainly have not, and I do not deserve that, but your anointing and your presence would be on me so that your people here today, that the people in this room can hear from you what it is you want them to hear, God. And I pray anything that comes out of my mouth this morning that is from you, God, they would remember forever, that it would pierce hearts, it would bring about paradigm changes, and it would draw people to a place where they understand and love you more. And God, anything that comes from me this morning, I pray you just strike from our memories forever. That's what I ask. In Christ's mighty name, amen. Well, like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I didn't grow up in the church world at all. In fact, I knew pretty much nothing about the gospel or Jesus. All I knew about Christianity and Jesus was that apparently Christmas was his birthday. Someone had told me that, apparently. And if you said Jesus Christ in school, you might get in trouble for cussing. That's about what I knew about the gospel, and I'm not even exaggerating. I remember a good old friend of mine, Jim Rhodes, said to me, "Hey man, you wanna come to church?" I'm like, "I've never been to church." I was about 14 years old, I'd never been to church, and he's like, "You should come to church." I was like, "Well, why?" And he goes, "Well, there's a lot of pretty girls at church." And I said, well, being the 14-year-old pervert that I was, I decided that church was a great place to go. And he was right. There were a lot of pretty girls at church. So I kept going because I like pretty girls. And so I kept going to church, and I attended on and off for about 9 months. And I kept trying to ask all these girls on dates, and they kept telling me that no, they were dating Jesus, because that's what she said in the 90s. You know, that was cool back then. Anyone go to church in the 90s and I go, "I'm dating Jesus." That's weird. Don't say that ever again. Okay. And so I remember like these girls would tell me that, and then I realized it, and I remember it. February 2nd, 1996, I was at a youth retreat with a few hundred students, and I remember specifically having a moment where there was a guy preaching, and he said, "Your life is nothing but a vapor. You're here one moment, you're gone the next." And he began to really challenge us about the idea of thinking about eternity. And I remember the moment when I had the realization that there is a God who loves me, and he's been chasing after me all the days of my life. Wow. And it changed my life forever. Now, 20 years later, having never looked back, I've had this awesome, incredible adventure with Jesus, the story that he has written in my life. And over again, he continually reminds me that he loves me. Over and over and over again, he continually reminds me that he loves me. So for the last few months, I'm kind of wrestling through kind of a weird season of my life and where I'm kind of like, what's next for me, God? I was in a ministry position and feeling like there's a new chapter of my life coming, and I'm not sure quite what that is. And so asking the Lord, and in this process for the last several months, I've been reading through the Gospels, all 4 Gospels. So if you're new to Christianity, you're not familiar, I know many of you probably know this already, but if you don't know this, the Bible actually is not one book. It's 66 mini books that we've kind of compiled into one. 4 of those 66 books, we call them the Gospels. These are the story of Jesus. And these are true stories, by the way. Sometimes there's a doubt as to whether or not these made up. No, they're actually true stories. It's 4 books, historical accounts. It's like a history book, like a history textbook, just not as boring. And so we call them the Gospels, and there's 4 of them from 4 different perspectives. And my favorite happens to be a book we call the Book of Mark, written by a guy named John Mark. And I remember a few weeks ago, Kevin called me and said, "Hey, man, would you come and speak? We've been going through the Book of Mark." And I'm like, I love the Book of Mark. It's my favorite. It's my favorite because he's really punchy. It gets to the point where like Matthew like gives you all these details, and like Luke gets you lots of details. And I'm like, I'm too ADD for that, bro. Like, Maddie, I love you. Luke, you're cool. You guys are awesome. But like, dude, I just need someone to get to the point. Like, John Mark is so awesome that he even dropped the John. He's like, let's just get to the point. Let's get the Mark. Like he just, like, I like this guy. He's very to the point. He's very clear. And so let's just go. So I really like John. I really like Mark, and he's really punchy. And so he focuses on 2 main things about the life of Jesus. He's always focusing on the compassion of Jesus and the power of Jesus. And I'll kind of unpack that in just a second. But we see as we travel through the book of Mark, we constantly see that he's getting to the point that Jesus is both powerful and he's compassionate, which is a big deal because if Jesus is compassionate, but doesn't have the power to do anything, that compassion doesn't feel like it's worth a whole lot. Like, it's nice to be compassionate, but you don't have the actual power to step in and do something that's motivated by compassion. Doesn't really help a whole lot. And if you're powerful, but you're not compassionate, that's actually kind of scary. Like, to think that God is powerful, could kill me, but he's not really compassionate. That's a scary thought. But when you understand that God is both compassionate and he's powerful, you get this incredible combination. And that's what Mark is continually alluding to. And so we travel through the book of Mark for several chapters. I know Kevin's telling me you guys have already been through the first 7 chapters of the book of Mark the last several weeks. And then we get to Mark chapter 8. And there's some really unique things here that Jesus kind of begins to unpack for us. Some thoughts that are both very challenging and exciting. And so we see in Mark chapter 8, at the very beginning of Mark, I'm just going to kind of breeze through the first 27 verses so very quickly. But we see that Mark begins to talk about Jesus with this large crowd of people. So there's about 4,000 people in this crowd. Maybe more. Historians believe that potentially maybe 4,000 is only counting the men. So maybe with women and children, it's a lot greater than that. But Jesus shows up, and there's this large crowd have been hanging out with him for several days. And they're all hungry. They've got no food. So this is actually the second time that Jesus has done this. We saw this in Mark chapter 6. He feeds a crew of 5,000 plus. And so now this is the second time where he sees a large crowd, and he has deep compassion for them, Mark says. And then he does something about it. They're hungry. Let's actually feed them. So he's driven by this compassion, and then he steps in and he does something about it. And it's an incredible miracle. He takes a few pieces of bread and a few fishes, and he turns it into enough food to feed thousands and thousands of people. This is kind of a big deal. It's actually a really big deal. And then we see he continues on, and then Jesus comes along and he has this conversation in Mark chapter 8 with these Pharisees. They were the religious people, the leadership of his day, and they were continually challenging him, and they're asking him, hey, why don't you give us another miracle? Give us a sign. And Jesus does it. He refuses to do a miracle to prove himself to them in that moment because he recognizes that their motives in that moment are actually not pure. They're not actually asking because they really care about Jesus. It's actually a very selfish intent, and I'll unpack in a second how we know that or why. Jesus is like, listen, you're not here to actually find out who I am. You're just kind of looking out for yourself. You're being selfish. I'm not going to do a miracle. So we see Jesus walk away from that. And then Jesus is walking into another town, and he sees a blind man. And again, Mark says that he's motivated by compassion. He sees a blind man, and he heals him. And it's awesome. And again, we see Jesus both being compassionate and powerful. And then he comes, after he heals this blind man, he's hanging out with his disciples, and they're traveling to another city. And we see this in Mark chapter 8, verse 27. If you have a Bible, you can follow along. If not, they're going to have it on the screen behind me there. Mark chapter 8, verse 27. So Jesus has fed the 4,000. He's had this little mini argument with some very religious people who were being incredibly selfish. And then he heals this blind guy. And then he comes here and he's hanging out with his disciples, his 12 brothers, his entourage, and he's traveling. And Jesus says this, or Mark says this, and Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, who do you say I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah. Who do people say I am? Excuse me. And then they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. So Jesus is hanging out with them, right? He's traveling with he's traveling with them through the city, and he goes, hey, who do people say I am out there? I know there's rumors going on around out there. Who do people claim Jesus is? And they're all kind of talking amongst themselves, and they're like, well, some people say you're John the Baptist. John the Baptist. They believe that John the Baptist was going to raise from the dead, and that his spirit was going to indwell another human. There's this belief among some of the people. And there was another belief that some thought, that Elijah, one of the prophets of old, the hundreds of years earlier, was going to raise from the dead, and that Jesus is actually Elijah incarnate. And we have this in our society today. We have people with all sorts of different perspectives on who Jesus is. And sometimes they seem valid, and a lot of times they're wacky. People have all kinds of beliefs about who Jesus is. He was a nice teacher, or he was a spiritual guru, and people have all kinds of perspectives in our society, in our world, as to what Jesus came to do. And it was no different then as it is today. And so he asked the disciples, hey, what are they saying about me out there? Peter's like, and they're all like, well, you're this, you're this, you're this. And then Jesus says to him, well, who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? He says this in verse 29, and he asked them, but who do you say I am? And Peter asked him, and I can imagine, Peter's like the oldest of the bunch. He's kind of the leader of the bunch. They all kind of look to him. And I can imagine in this moment, Jesus is like, well, who do they say I am? Well, some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, some say all these other kind of crazy things. And Jesus is like, well, who do you say I am? They're all like, look to Peter. And Peter's like, well, you're the Christ. And it's the greatest question you could ever be asked in your entire life is, who do you say Jesus is? And Peter says, you are the Christ. Now, this is really good, except it's incredibly incomplete. And to really understand what's happening here, we got to kind of take a quick history lesson. So travel with me all the way back to a little place called the Garden of Eden. And so this is a true story. This actually happened. The Bible in the book of Genesis tells us the true accounts, the narrative of how the world began. God created a garden. He created everything we see in the natural world, stars, planets, animals, trees, everything all around us. It was really, really awesome. And God creates everything in creation to prove how creative he really is. He comes up with this really awesome creation. But then at the very end of the creation account, God creates something very unique. He creates human beings. He creates you and I. Humanity. And humanity is the masterpiece of creation. It's the Mona Lisa of creation. And because humans are created very differently than he created everything else. You see, animals and the trees and the cosmos which we can observe was created to show God's power and creativity. But we were created to actually demonstrate characteristics of God. So the Bible says that we were created in his image. God says, let us make man in our image. He takes portions of himself and he indwells it in humanity. So we can look around humanity and we can see God. We can see, oh, I see Kevin does that thing really well. That's what God must look like. Now, I'm not talking about physical appearances. I'm talking about characteristics and elements. I could look and say, oh, Dan does that thing really well. I bet that's probably how God does that. He got that from God. Oh, wow, that's really cool. Man, I can see how Chris does that thing really well. That's God. Wow, that's really cool. We were created to be God's image bearers. There's a Latin term called the imago Dei. We were created with the image of God, to be his mirror on planet Earth. That was our purpose. That was the role of the story that we were supposed to play. And this is awesome. So God creates Adam and Eve with the image of God, and they're hanging out in the garden, and the Bible says that God would come down in the cool of the day. Like, that couldn't have been Chicago in July, because there's no cool of the day, right, in Chicago in July. I'm sure that the Garden of Eden was not humid. Like, I'm convinced of it. Like, I'm convinced it was just like 72, no humidity. Like, humidity is a product of the fall. I don't know. I just made that up. But the Bible says he would hang out with them. He had a friendship with them. God, who created everything, would come out and hang out with Adam and Eve. I don't know what they did. They chatted. Maybe they played Monopoly. I don't know. I have no clue what they did. But this is so awesome. This is God and Adam having face-to-face, Eve and God hanging out, face-to-face friendship with God. I don't know about you. This has got to be the coolest thing that's ever happened in human history. Until the story was interrupted for a moment. You see, Adam and Eve determined that they no longer wanted to play the small role in God's story. You see, God is the most important character in the story that he's writing. And Adam and Eve had a moment where they decided that they didn't want to be a part of his story, that they wanted to have their own story. They didn't want to acknowledge his divinity. They wanted to chase after their own divinity. We know it's not okay for God to be in control. We want to take control. That's ultimately what Adam and Eve do. They have this guy named Satan. He's the enemy of God. He shows up and he says, you know what? You really should disobey God. You should eat of that fruit that God says not to eat from. Because, you see, the reason why God doesn't want you to eat that, because then he knows that you're going to be like him. See, Adam and Eve are saying to themselves, well, God's up here and we're down here. And if we eat of the fruit, we could be like God. We could be on par with God. It's not enough for me to just be subordinate to him. We could be like him. That sounds awesome. I can be in control of my own life. That's a fantastic story, Satan. Yes, we will eat of the fruit. And instantly in this moment, sin enters humanity. And sin is this spiritual disease that ravages our souls. It wreaks havoc on who we are. It destroys elements of our character. It destroys much of what we touch and do. The Imago Dei instantly is marred. There are elements of the Imago Dei that get stripped from us. We no longer look like God. We look like a twisted, warped, corrupted version of the image of God. And this has devastating impact on our lives and all of the world. And the entire Bible makes it very clear the depravity, the folly of humanity, the stupid choices that we make. It started with Adam and Eve, and now it goes all the way us today, all of us to us today. Every single one of us have chosen to sin. All of us have chosen at some point to betray what God has asked us to do, and sin comes in and it ravages our soul. And the story could have ended there. That actually could have been the end of the story. You see, when God had first created humanity, we were defined by his love. We were his image bearers. We were friends of God. We were on his good side. But then we choose to sin, and sin redefines us. And now we're defined, as the Bible calls us, enemies of God, hostile toward God, as sinners, unclean, deserving of being separated from God. We are now unrighteous, meaning we are no longer in right standing with God. The friendship with God was broken. We're no longer on his good side. Now we're on his bad side. We're on the bad list. And God could have said in that moment, to hell with all of you. Literally. That could have been the end of the story. And I'd even argue that maybe it should have been the end of the story in some ways. That's what we deserve. That would be justice. That would be right. But God, being rich in mercy, abounding in love, because he has this desperate, passionate affection for you and for me, he says, I refuse for that to be the end of the story. I refuse. God says, I'm going to make a way to bridge the gap. See, because of our sin, because we wanted to be in control, because we wanted to be the stars of our own story, we created a gap between us and God. We created a chasm. And God says, you can't come to me. The chasm is too wide. You don't have it in you to fix it. You can't come back to me, so I will go to you. And God, the Trinity, God created and existing in three persons, comes and he rips himself apart. The Father and the Son literally step away from one another, and Jesus comes into planet Earth. He comes and he lives among us. The God of the universe crawls into a human infant body. Talk about inconvenient and cramped. He crawls into a human body. He's dependent on a human mother. He subjects himself to all the pain that we had brought upon ourselves, all the consequences of sin that you and I deserved. He begins to suffer and experience on planet Earth because he wanted to experience what we were experiencing. And then he goes to a wicked cross where the Romans crucify him, and he dies a brutal, wicked death. And God takes all the guilt of the world and all the guilt of our sin, your sin and my sin, and he puts it on himself on a cross. And then 3 days later, he rises from the dead. This is a big deal. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't know what Easter was. I remember I was 12 years old the first time someone ever told me, did you know that Easter is the day that we celebrate that Jesus rose from the dead? I'm like, no one ever was risen from the dead. That's stupid. Easter was like the day of Easter bunny. You go to the movies, you put a nice outfit, you do that was my family. That's what we did in my family. No one ever came back from the dead. I remember the moment I realized that Jesus had come back from the dead. He physically came back to life. Like, this is a big deal. This should be on the front page of the Chicago Tribune every single morning. Like, reminder, he came back from the dead. That's a really, really big deal. And this is the story that God is writing. The story that leads to our brokenness being rectified. The chasm between us and God being corrected. This is the story that God desires, motivated by an incredible compassion and executed by his incredible power. This is who God is. He's writing this story. And he says, if you will follow me, if you will be one of my followers, I will forgive you of your sin. The work I did at the cross will apply to you if you will follow me. And I will give you an opportunity to have friendship with you again. I'm inviting you into the story that I am writing. And it's going to be awesome. Will you come? Will you come? This is the story that Jesus is writing. And so when we dive into Mark chapter 8, This is the middle of the story unfolding. See, we know the end of the story, but the disciples in this moment in Mark chapter 8 don't necessarily understand the end of it. In this moment, Jesus says to them, who do you think I am? He says, well, you're the Christ. And they have a good idea that he's the Christ. This is good, but it's incredibly incomplete. And here's the reason why. You see, because after Adam and Eve leave the garden, I can't talk this morning. When Adam and Eve leave the garden, they end up living in humanity. They're living on planet Earth, and the world comes, and we see true stories like Noah. At this point, there's about 1 billion people on the planet, and God judges the world, and he brings a flood, and he kills lots of people. But he says, listen, I could wipe all of you out, but I choose to save some so that I can write a grander story. See, way back in the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve leave the garden, he tells them, I'm going to send a rescuer to rescue humanity from the problem that you created. That's what he tells them. And then we see this with Noah. And then thousands of years later, we see a guy named Abraham come on the scene. And God says, Abraham, I want you to follow me. And from you, I'm going to bring forth a rescuer. And then he has a son named Isaac. And then Isaac has a son named Jacob. And then Jacob has 12 sons. And then Jacob and his 12 sons, they end up being the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, all of their descendants. And they begin to grow and grow. And through a really cool, awesome, crazy sequence of events, they end up as slaves in Egypt. For 400 years, they're in Egypt. And the Jewish people are growing and growing and growing. And God promises he's going to send them a rescuer. And finally, he sends a guy named Moses. Has anyone ever seen the movie Prince of Egypt? Raise your hand. You ever seen Prince of Egypt? Great. You can put your hands down. If you've not seen it, you had a deprived childhood. Go home and watch The Prince of Egypt. It's Disney's account. It's actually somewhat accurate to the Bible's account. Okay, so Moses comes. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Moses. Moses comes, and he rescues the people, leads them out of Egypt into the promised land, and then they live there. And then 1,400 years of human history. And the Old Testament gives us all the true account of 1,400 years of human history of going into the promised land and all the way to the time of Jesus. And at some point in this human history, the Roman Empire is growing and growing. And eventually they begin to take over the entire known world. And they come in and they take over Israel. And through a variety of different wars, the Israelites, the Jewish people living in Israel in the first century, end up being subjugated under the Romans. So they had their own little nation, so they had their own king and their own leadership, but they had to pay massive taxes to the Roman government. So for the regular people, they were oppressed by the Jewish leadership and had to pay taxes to them, and they were oppressed by the Romans and had to pay massive taxes to them. This is an incredibly terrible scenario to be in if you're a first century Jewish person. And this is the scene that Jesus shows up into in the middle of. He's in the middle. This is the political landscape of the day. Jesus knows why he's coming. They do not. Because they are thinking, the Jewish people are thinking, that the Messiah is going to come and rescue us from the Romans. You see, the Messiah is going to come to planet Earth, and he's going to come, and he's going to have supernatural power, and he's going to become the king of Israel, and he's going to kill all the Romans and take over. We're going to have a great, mighty nation, Israel. And God's going to love the Jews and kill everybody else. That's pretty much what most of them believed at the time. So when Peter says to Jesus, you are the Christ, he's right, but his perspective is greatly warped. It's greatly warped, and it's incredibly incomplete. And Jesus knows this. So Jesus then begins to describe what the story's really going to look like. You see, earlier in Mark 8, when the Pharisees were asking him, show us a sign that you're the Messiah. Show us that you're really powerful. Some of the Pharisees were like, hey, listen, if he really is the Messiah, we better get in good with him. Because when he's the king of the world, we want to be cool. See, they weren't asking him, show us a sign because we want to worship you. They were saying, show us a sign so I can get in good with you. It's like a corrupt lobbyist. They were like the first lobbyists of the day, right? That's what they were doing. And some of the other Pharisees were saying, well, show us your power, because they're thinking to themselves, if he's really the Messiah, we got to kill him, because we like the power structure. You see, the Pharisees, they could do whatever they wanted. As long as they paid taxes to the Romans let them do whatever they wanted. And they were like, look, we like the power structure. We like oppressing the people. We don't got time for some guy to come and try to rescue that. Ain't nobody got time for that. That's what I'm saying? That's what the Pharisees were saying. So they're like, is this guy really the Messiah? Because let's kill this dude. Side note, that's pretty stupid. If he's the Messiah, he's going to know you're going to try to kill him. Like, really, come on, Pharisees. It's kind of dumb. So then Jesus is looking at his disciples, right? So he's done all these cool things. He's hanging out with his disciples. He's like, what are the rumors about me? What are the rumors going on around there about me? Some of you say you're Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're something else. What do you say I am? Who do you say I am? Peter goes, I'm the Christ. Jesus is like, you're right. And then Jesus begins to tell them how the story is going to unfold. Mark 8:31 says this, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. Now, I love that it says it plainly because typically Jesus speaks in metaphors and stories and parables, but he wants to make sure they get this. So he's saying it very clearly. So Peter says, you're the Christ, and Jesus goes, you're right. And let me tell you what's going to happen to the Christ. He's going to be rejected by the elders, which were the key political leaders of their time. They're rejected by the chief priests, which were the key religious leaders of the day, and rejected by the scribes, which were like the historians, the college professors, the attorneys, the people who kept track of what happened. So pretty much anyone who's anybody in the entire establishment is going to reject me. And then I'm going to die, and then I'm going to come back from the dead. He's making it very clear. He's telling them the story. And Peter, the Bible says, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. So Peter's thinking, he's hearing Jesus tell the story. He's like, I don't think Jesus got the memo how it's supposed to go. So he's like, Jesus, come here. He takes him aside. He's like, come here, bro. And the word rebuke means to tell someone they're wrong and try to get them to change their mind. It's basically, so Peter's like, hey, brother, like Jesus, like that miracle, the fish and the loaves, pretty cool. All right. And the blind dude, legit. Okay. Hashtag awesome. Okay. So hashtag do work. Okay. So he's like, dude, that's so legit. He's like, but Jesus, I think you're missing the point, brother. You're not supposed to die. You're not going to be rejected by the chief priests and the elders. That's not what the Messiah does. Don't you know the Messiah comes, becomes king, overthrows the Roman government, and it's awesome. We party forever. Dude, don't try to tell me this die nonsense. I know you're really smart, but you're a little bit wrong here. Let me tell you, I know that you've got a story that you're writing, but I've got a story that's more important than yours, Jesus. You see, I know you want things to go a certain way, but I want things to go a different way. So let me rebuke you. Let me tell you why you should do it my way. It's basically what Peter is doing. Peter begins to tell Jesus, listen, we're Jews and we're oppressed, and we're really important. You see, we're the central character, Jesus. Don't you get it? We are the most important thing. The Romans are oppressing us. Your sole focus should be rescuing me from the Romans because I'm important. Jesus, don't you get it? The Bible says this. This is how Jesus responds. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Jesus and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on things of God, but on the things of man. Jesus and Peter are having this interaction. Jesus looks to see his disciples. He turns his back on Peter for a moment. And I can just remember this, I can realize this moment. What's the humanity? The human Jesus is thinking, man, this would be a whole lot cooler, wouldn't it? Not have to die, not be rejected, take over the world, overthrow the Roman governments, be worshipped on planet Earth. That sounds way cooler than dying on a cross. That story is way more awesome, I think. Then he looks at his disciples, and I can imagine, as we see over and over again in Mark, when Jesus sees people in need, he's moved by compassion. And he sees his disciples, and he sees that they need an eternal rescue. See, they were looking at the Roman government as the oppressor, and Jesus is going, there's something so much bigger than the Roman government. He didn't care about them being rescued from the clutches of the Roman slavery. He was worried about them, concerned about them being rescued from the clutches of hell. Something much bigger, such grander. And he looks at him and he goes, no. Disciples are important. Humans are important. And there's only one story that I'm here to fulfill. And he turns his back on Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. So he's looking at Peter, he's going, dude, right now the way you're talking, it sounds a whole lot like Satan. It sounds eerily similar to what Satan said to Adam and Eve in the garden. See, in the garden, he goes, God says, do this story. God is here, you're here. Follow your own story and let you become equal to God because you're important. God, you should be the star of the story. You should have your name in lights. It's all about you being rescued. And in this moment, Peter is telling him, we, the Jews, were important. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about what you tried to accomplish. Jesus, you're confused about the mission. The mission should be what I want, rescuing me because I'm important. Your story seems important, but I need to be equal. And it's the same story that the enemy told Adam and Eve, and it's the same story he's told for centuries, and it's the same story he convinced Peter in that moment, and it's the same story he tells you and I every day. You're important. Pursue your own divinity. You be in control. You do what you want to do. It should go the way you want. And if God doesn't do it the way you want it, you should get angry with God. You should say, God, you should change the way you want to do it and do it the way I want to do it. Jesus says, Peter, you sound a whole lot like Satan right now. You see, when we pursue our own story and our own stardom, we sound like Satan. We look like Satan. And then Jesus says this in Mark 8:34, or John Mark writes this, and calling the crowd to him, see now he brings the whole crowd together, large, he goes, bring the whole crowd to him with his disciples. He said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Jesus says, deny yourself. What you want, what you desire, your desire to make yourself important, deny it. He says, take up your cross. Like, see, we've made the cross this really cool piece of jewelry in our society. Like, the cross in the day was like an electric chair. Like, Jesus is saying, hey, listen, you want to be a Christian? You want to really be a part of the story that I'm writing? Hey, go to the hardware store, buy an electric chair, take it home, strap yourself in, plug it in, and turn it on high. What are you talking about, dude? That's crazy. Jesus is saying, listen, you want to really be a part of my story? Here's what it takes. Die. Death. And he's not talking about a physical death. He's talking about us dying. Moment by moment, day by day. What does it really mean to die? Let me give you a few modern examples. The number one place where we need to die is our ego. Anything that drives me to be made more important. God is not out to hurt your pride. He's out to kill it. God is not out to hurt your ego. He's out to eradicate it. Because that's the number one thing that causes us to want to be on par with God. It's the number one thing that will destroy our lives. It did it in the garden with Adam and Eve. It's done it with humans for several millennia. And now with you and I, the same choice. Anything that you want in you, anything in you that causes yourself to elevate yourself is something that must die. I remember a couple nights ago in a small group on Friday night, someone in the group said something, Jesus is healing people regularly and tells them, don't tell anybody about this. And someone in the group kind of made a joke and just like, I don't know about you, but if it were me, like, I want everybody to know how awesome I was, like, because I want my reputation to be out there. I wouldn't tell anyone to be quiet. I'd tell them to shout it from the mountaintop. Tweet that thing to all of your Twitter followers. I want to be famous. And that desire in you to be famous must die. Must be killed. Anytime you feel pain or insulted or you're disappointed with something or you face some form of suffering or someone has failed you or you're facing injustice, these are all moments where we have emotions rise up, where we think we're important. And those are the moments that Jesus says, it's time for you to die. At small group the other night, someone else said this. I thought it was a great example. They said, sometimes I get home late at night, and my kids are like, will you come cuddle with me and sit in the bed? And the person was like, I don't want to cuddle. I'm tired. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm tired. I want to look out for me. And in that moment, dying would mean I'm going to go demonstrate the love to my kid. And I don't have kids myself, but I think to myself, man, I wouldn't want to go cuddle with kids, even when I'm energetic and excited, let alone tired. How about when you have road rage and someone cuts you off, right? You're angry at that person because I'm important. How dare you take my spot in the road and cause me to be 2 seconds later to my place? But ultimately it's because we believe we're important, so then we get angry. Maybe that sounds simple and silly, but it begins to play out in bigger ways. How about when you have an opportunity to cheat in life and get ahead? Maybe at work or maybe on your taxes. You have an opportunity to do something, maybe it's not quite ethical, but it can expand my story. It can make me look better. I can gain something I want. But God's story would be for me to live according to his word and to be a person of integrity. Are you willing to allow what you want to die in that moment? How about when your spouse offends you? How about when your spouse doesn't do what you think you deserve? She doesn't honor you or he doesn't respect you. That's the moment you can go, I deserve this. I'm important. And that thing inside of you wants to get angry. That's the thing that Jesus says, I want to crucify that thing inside of you. I want that to die. How about when your kids disrespect you and you want to correct them? Now, there's a moment to correct them that's appropriate, of course. But oftentimes, as parents, when we have conversations, we can be honest and say, we can talk to her and say, man, maybe we're not correcting our kids because we actually love them in that moment. We're looking out for them. We're correcting them because we're just angry that they disrespected us. I'm important. I'm the parent. How dare you? It's my story. I'm important. How about when you don't get the promotion at work and the story doesn't go the way you want it to go? How about when you get sick and you're mad at God? Listen, people face real things. Miscarriages and cancer, death of people close to us. Those are real things, and it hurts, and it sucks, it stinks, it's hard. And even in those moments, God says, I know what I'm doing. I'm in control. I'm sovereign. I mean, I control everything. Are you going to trust me? Are you willing to say, God, I don't know why you're doing this, but I know that you're the boss. You're the boss. Are you willing to do that? You see, dying and crucifying yourself and denying yourself and following Jesus could cost you lots in life. It could lead to loneliness or rejection. You could be hated by your friends or by your parents or your family. It could cost you your reputation, friendships, money, maybe even your life. The United States, it probably wouldn't, but in a lot of parts of the world, following Jesus could actually cost you your physical life. You see, so often we want the story to go our way. We want our life to go good in the way we want it to go good. We want to be praised. We want to be liked. We want to be accepted. But oftentimes, we must be willing to sacrifice those things for the story of God to be shown. You see, we think we are the star of the show, and God's saying, I want you to play a background role. You're not but a background dancer. It's nice to the addition of the story, but if the background dancer wasn't there, the story's still going to happen. You see, even if you choose not to engage in God's story, He's sovereign enough, He's going to do what He wants. He's saying, I want you to come be a part of the story because I love you, not because I need you. So let's not get our minds in a place of thinking we're more important than what we really are. We're not the star, we're the stardust that points to the star. That's what we are. Are you willing to play second fiddle? Are you willing to really let Him take control and to live according to His word? Are you willing to take time to spend time with Him and glean from Him? Are you willing to really let Jesus be in control of your life? Because all of us have a throne in our hearts. We have our own little mini kingdoms. But the throne only has space for one person. Only one person can sit on the throne. It's either you or Jesus, not both. And if you're really going to follow Jesus, if you're really going to do this Christian thing, if you're really going to be a part of His story, you got to say, Jesus, you sit on the throne. You sit on the throne. Are we really willing to make Jesus number one? Here's what Jesus says in Mark 8:35. He says, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will save it. If you try to keep your life, you're going to lose it. But if you're willing to lose it for me, oh, you're going to save something so great. One of my favorite pastors and authors is a guy who's a pastor in Minneapolis for many years, a guy named John Piper. He says this, it is better to lose your life than to waste it. It is better to lose your life than to waste it. And then in Mark 8:36, Jesus says this, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? You're like, dude, this cross, this thing is too hard. It's too hard to die. Yeah, you may not die in the way Jesus wants you to. You may gain a lot in this world. What value is that if you gain the whole world, but your soul is separated from God? If you're still on His bad side. If you don't engage in the story of Him fixing the chasm, of Him reconciling us. What does it matter if you can't enjoy the affectionate friendship with God? What does it matter what you gain in this life? See, Jesus is not looking for your suggestions on how things should go. He's looking for you to die. He's not asking your advice or your opinion. He's asking for you to give up anything that He asks of you to give up. That's what He's asking. Are you really willing to sacrifice being the starring role? Are you willing to embrace stage fright? Listen, you're the main character. I'm going to come over here and let you do the thing. You are the most important thing in my life. It's a great story. I'm going to finish in just a moment. Here's a great story about a guy named Kenny Baker. He's an actor. He's a British comedian and actor. He's 3 foot tall, 8 inches. He's legally a dwarf, I believe is what he officially is. And so Kenny Baker, in the late 70s, was trying to break into Hollywood, so he moves to Los Angeles, and he has an opportunity to be in a particular movie, and then he has another opportunity to come to a different. So he's got a couple different options, and he's kind of weighing his options between these 2 particular movies. Excuse me, 1 second. He has this, so he has an option to be in this movie, and he's trying to pick between the 2. In one of them, he's going to play a very small background role. His face is never going to be known. In fact, his voice would never be heard. No one would ever know who he was. He's a really small background role. But it's a movie that they're thinking could be big, but they're not sure. And then there's another movie that he has an opportunity, but he's like, you could be the starring role, maybe like the second starring role. So it's a bigger idea. It's more paycheck, more fame. And Kenny Baker says, I think I'm going to pick that movie because it's, I want to be the starring role. I want to be known. I want my face to be seen. I want my voice to be heard. I want my name to be known. And he picks this movie called UFO. And this is in the late 70s, so he decided he's going to fill this movie with UFO. And then last minute, the studio, this is the poster for it. And at the last minute, the studio decides they're not going to film the movie. They end up canceling the movie. And they end up not filming the movie until 1992. Funny story. And he ends up not even playing a starring role. He ends up being in the movie 15 years later, but he ends up playing a secondary role. The main actors are being Roy Chubby Brown, who I've actually never heard of either, but my dad had heard of him. So this movie came out in the early 90s, but Kenny Baker picks UFO because he wants a more important role. And then he decided he canceled it, so he ends up calling back the director and says, hey, do you still have that role in the other movie, that small movie? That small part. And he goes, yeah, we still have it. We haven't given it away yet. He goes, great, I want you to be in it. This is little old movie. You may have heard of it. It's called Star Wars. You ever heard of it? You ever heard of this movie? No, you never heard of this, right? You know who Kenny Baker is? He's R2-D2. Yeah, he's a trash can. Literally. He picks being the star of UFO over being a background role in Star Wars. Now, we now know the end of the story, right? None of us would say, dude, would you pass up being in Star Wars? Of course you wouldn't. It's Star Wars. It's the most epic movie ever shown, ever. It's awesome. Revolutionized the movie industry, right? Like, who would pick a background role in UFO? Or, I'm sorry, who would pick the starring role in UFO over a background role in Star Wars? None of you would do that. You go to Wikipedia page right now, you go to Kenny Baker's Wikipedia page, you know what it says? Kenny Baker, most known, he's a British actor, comedian, most known for being R2-D2 in Star Wars. That's his claim to fame. And if he walked in this room before today, you wouldn't recognize his face. You would never heard his voice. Most of you probably never heard his name. Has anyone ever heard the name Kenny Baker before today? Raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, okay, 3, all right, 3. Not very famous, right? But how many of you guys have ever heard of Star Wars? Raise your hand really high. Yeah, you can put your hands. Yeah. Now, this is silly in some ways, but I think this is what we do every day in our lives. We want to be the starring role of our own story, and God's like, dude, I got an epic story. It's way bigger. You just got to be willing to not be famous. You got to be willing to not do your own thing. You got to be willing to not be the star. See, I know you want to be praised. I know you want to be important. I know you want things to go your way. But man, if you're willing to kill that, if you're willing to die, if you're willing to play a background role and never have your face seen and never be famous and things not go your way, let me tell you, I got a way bigger story that you could be a part of. Oh, God's story is way bigger than any story that we could conjure up on our own. See, God is writing an incredible story, and he's inviting us to be a part of it. But to be a part of it, we got to be willing to die. We got to be willing to say, I'm not important. God is the most important. We got to be willing to realize, you see, it's not about me. It's never been about me. It'll never be about me. It's all about Jesus. It's always been all about Jesus. It will always be all about Jesus. I'm going to close with the lyrics of a song that I love. In 2009, a guy by the name of LeCrae. Anyone ever heard of LeCrae? Raise your hand. You're like, all right, so we got a few. Put your hands there. I'm a big hip-hop fan. I love hip-hop music, but most of it is trashy and misogynistic and just not Christ-honoring at all. So I can't listen to most hip-hop music, but I just don't feel appropriate. But when LeCrae came out, I was like, thank you, Jesus. A rapper who loves Jesus is awesome. And I love LeCrae. And here are the lyrics of a song called Background. It came out in 2009. I'm going to read these to you, and they're going to have them on the screen. You can just kind of follow along with me. Because I believe this is the prayer that we ought to have. LeCrae says this: it is evident you run the show, so let me back down. You take the leading role. I'll play the background. I know I miss my cues. No, I forget my lines. I'm sticking to your script. I'm reading all your signs.
I don't need my name in the lights. I don't need a starring role. Why gain the whole wide world if I'm just going to lose my soul? And my ways ain't pure if I don't live according to your word. I can't endure this life without your wisdom being heard. So word to every dancer for a pop star, because we all play the background, but mine's a rock star. Yeah, so if you need me, I'll be stage right. Praying the whole world will start embracing stage fright. So let me fall back. Stop giving my suggestions. Because when I follow my obsessions, I end up confessing that I'm not that impressive. Matter of fact, I'm who I are. A trail of stardust leading to the superstar. Verse 2. The song says, I had a dream that I was captain of my soul. I was master of my fate, lost control, and then I sank. So I don't want to take the lead because I'm prone to make mistakes. All these folks who follow me going to end up in the wrong place. So let me just shadow you. Let me trace your lines. You know, matter of fact, just take my pen. Here, you create my rhymes. Because if I do this by myself, I'm scared that I'll succeed. And no longer trust in you. Because I only trusted me. And see, that's how you ended up headed to destruction. Paving the road to nowhere. Pour out your life for nothing. You pulled my card, I'm bluffing. You know what's in my hand. Me, I just roll and trust you. You cause the dice to land. I'm in control of nothing. I'll follow you at any cost. Some call it sovereign will. All I know is you the boss. Man, I'm so at ease and I'm so content. I'll play the background like it's an instrument. This is the bridge. It says, I know I'm safest when I'm in your will and trust your word. I know I'm dangerous when I trust myself, my vision blurred. And I ain't got no time to play life's foolish games. Got plenty aims, but do they really glorify your name? Got plenty aims, but do they really glorify your name? And it's a shame the way I want to do these things from you, but don't even cling to you, take time to sit and glean from you. It seems you were patient in my ignorance. If ignorance is bliss, it's because she never heard of this. I could play the background. I could play the background. Because I know sometimes that I get in the way. So won't you take the lead, the lead, the lead? Won't you take the lead, the lead, the lead? And I could play the background, and you could take the lead. Just pray. Jesus, may you take the lead of my life. May I take the background. And God, may I not be focused on my way of doing things or what I want, but may I be focused on dying every single day. God, may I not seek to make your story secondary to my story, where I'm the most important character. But God, may I be willing to sacrifice everything to engage in your story, where you're the most important character. God, may everything in our lives, in our hearts, in our minds point to glorifying you. God, may I recognize that I am who I are, a trail of stardust leading to the superstar. God, will you give us supernaturally the grace and the ability to choose to engage in your story, to choose to follow you at any cost. God, help me. I need your grace. I need your help. I can't do it on my own. Will you supernaturally help me to point people to you? Help me to see when I'm trying to be the superstar. Help me to die, to pick up my cross. Help me, God, to be nothing but the stardust. May I play the background. And I ask that Jesus, as we do that, would you honor that effort, that puny, insignificant effort we can bring to the table? Would you honor that? Supernaturally take over and give us the ability to point to you. God, you be the lead. You be the star of the show. Give us the ability to do nothing but play the background. And as we do that, God, would you proclaim your own name? Would you proclaim yourself and use us to preach your story in whatever way you want that? I ask all the things in the precious, incredible name of Christ.